So to get ready to draw and ink some animals, we want to warm up and sketch some first and get practice in making proportions. So today we're going to do these two animals in your sketchbook. You can pick any animals you want to, but I'm going to do these two, and if you want to use the same ones as me, that's great. We'll put them on the same page, but we'll start out with just this hummingbird. So first I'll change color so you can see. You guys are going to use your pencils to do this though. So remember that when we sketch lightly, and we want to start by finding the base of the animal. I always start with a circle for the skull. So that's the first thing I'm going to draw. Remember, that determines how big this drawing is going to be. And this animal takes up a lot of vertical space, so make sure that you give it room, that it has wings, and then it has a tail going kind of down below. I'll start by drawing the head, and then I'm going to use that head to figure out the proportions of the rest of this body. So remember how we went in last time and we figured out how to break down our animals? I'm doing the same thing. So there's kind of a diagonal line going down, and the whole body of this hummingbird is about 2 more heads wide, going diagonally. So I'm going to add those on. And from here, I'm going to focus on the head. You can see there's a green part of the head, and then there's the body of it. So right in the middle on that second circle, going diagonally, is where the head is kind of separated from the body. So I'm going to simplify that shape. Kind of looks like a thumb right there. And that's going to represent the head and the neck of this hummingbird. Then I can do the body of this. So the body of this is another kind of simple round shape. And if I draw that in, you see that it has this kind of sharp end at the bottom, and then it curves and connects back into the neck. Okay. So now that we've got the body, let's attach the tail to it. So the tail has these angles coming out of it. One of them is all the way from the back, so I'm going to add that line. And then the other one is at a kind of more downwards angle, kind of heading towards the body. The bottom of it is like a fan or a curve, and then I'll deal with the individual parts of that after. So I'm not worried about the individual feathers yet. Let's get in the shape of the wings next. So the wings are very tall, and again, you can figure out how tall they are by comparing that to the head. But we want the angle of that as well as the proportions to be accurate. So this is about 3.5 heads tall, and it goes up at an angle right where that separation between the head and the body are. So I use the head proportions to get that, angle it correctly, and then there's a curve kind of downward. So this looks similar to a knife. Kind of scary. There's some slight details in there that are curving that I'd like to add, but you can save those for later if you want all your details to come at the end. There's a back wing as well that we want to add. So I can just compare this negative space. There's a little V shape there. So that's how far I want to make it. And I'm going to have a similar curve come in. It's just going to end a little bit more lower than the first initial wing that we had, and there's these 2 kind of bumps at the bottom. So I have a very basic sense of proportion. The only thing that's left is the beak area. So a lot of people have the beak come out from a triangle first, so connect the beak, and then you're going to add a very thin line to it, and that's going to represent the thin line coming out, or the thin beak coming out of the head. So make sure that that triangle is there and it's not just coming out of that circle. So now that I have my proportions, I'm going to start adding details to this. So I lightened out my sketch, and I'm going to start adding details in the face. So one of the things that's missing right now is the eye, so I'm going to start there. So I'm going to get in really close, and if you look at the eye of this, it's kind of like a circle almost, and it's almost completely black. There's just a little bit of shine to it, and I think that really brings creatures to life. So don't forget to leave just a tiny bit of shine in there. If you leave it black, they kind of look very dead. So even if you don't see them in your animal, I always like to add them anyways. So I have that, Now I'm going to kind of finalize the lines around the actual head of this animal. I'm not worried about all the individual feathers because these ones are kind of smooth, so it doesn't matter. I'm gonna go around the beak, kind of towards where the eye is, come back around, and then go underneath. And then again, smooth lines for like the little beak. There's a kind of a bump at the way end of it that you want to get, so don't just have it be this very sharp kind of pointy thing coming out. Next, we want to get in the neck separated from the body, and this one has a little bit of texture, so I'm not going to do just a straight line, but this kind of jagged line to indicate that separation isn't super smooth. The body again has a little bit of texture, so my lines are no longer super smooth where that's occurring. So check always what your textures are. The back is smooth, but then there's kind of these bigger, chunkier feathers that lead back up into the body. So I don't need to get them exactly right, but I want to kind of look at them. So if it helps you to trace them and figure out how many bumps there are, it's like 2 big ones, 2 small ones, and then 1 tiny last one before it connects into the body. We're going to go up into the wings now, add a little bit of those details. Let's actually start down at the tail feather. So if I count less than 10, then I want to try and get that number correct. So over here we can see like a clump, then 4 feathers. So I'm going to separate the tail and try to get those lines as accurate as I can. So there's 5 lines. So the first one is going to represent that kind of clump area. The next one is going to be that next kind of smaller feather. Notice that they get a little bit longer as they go more towards the inside. So they're going to get a little bit longer as they come out. Don't make the mistake of making leaf shapes, but really look at the actual shape of your feathers, see which ones are overlapping and which ones are like kind of behind. Then you can finalize like that central area of the feather to give it that unique feather texture. Okay, now we're going to move on to the wings, which are separated into like 3 kind of distinct areas. So there's the part that's closest to the body, and then the middle part, and then finally the very kind of long feather end bits of the wings. So we want to get those parts closer to the body first. So the very shortest feathers kind of curve and then go down into the body. And there's a bunch of little bumps that we'll add. The middle, again, has like a slight curve to it, so just very lightly I'll put those in. And then I will start to add more detail to those bumps as we go on. So it started as a sketch, and now I'm going to add those in. Again, I'm not super concerned with getting that as accurate as possible, but I want the effect of that texture. I imagine it'll be different on all birds. All right, the middle, also the bumps occur in there. You can kind of see these lines are coming out. We're not super concerned with those, but we want to create these idea of these bigger kind of chunkier feathers coming out of there. They're a little bit shorter, but they are starting the wing off. And then finally we have the very long ones. Now I told you you don't need to count every single one of them, but you want to get generally the look of them right. So I'm going to start making these very long lines. I'm going to use our old lines as guidelines for what size these are all going to be. They kind of overlap a little bit more at the end, and I can add more details with the overlapping as we go along. Okay, so the back wing is kind of the last area that I need to address. It's very similar. I see more of that overlapping happening. So when I start drawing these, you're going to see that my lines kind of go over one another. So I draw the first feather, I start the next one kind of in it, and then go down. And I'll just continue that process as we go down again, we use those old, very light sketch lines to help us with what size they are. We don't want to do this where there's kind of these random round shapes, but we really want to look at what the picture looks like and try our best to estimate that same effect. So there is my hummingbird, and it looks pretty accurate. You can add in whatever details that you think are missing from this point. Remember that the goal of today is to get the proportions and the look right, but we're not really after all that shading. If you want to do that in your own time to practice, that's fine. But this is good enough for what we need for today. So on the same page, we're going to be sketching out a dog as well. So a nice pose where I can see all of the different legs on here. I can see the tail, the face of it. So it should be pretty straightforward. This time we're going to have kind of more horizontal space. It's a very rectangular kind of object or animal. So make sure you have that. We're going to start out the same way that we did last time. So we're going to draw a circle at the base of its skull and use that to get the rest of our proportions. Alright, so when you draw that, remember that there should be a lot of room after the first circle on the right side so that I can draw the rest of this body. We're going to start out with the neck, which is very short. So I'm just going to draw that as a line. I can fill that in later. And then I'm going to use that first circle, that skull, again to get the proportions of my body. So if I use that starting from the front all the way to the back, I can see that this guy is maybe 1, 2, 3.5 heads wide. So figure out where to start that. So start probably in the middle of the circle and then add 1, 2, 3.5 is the full length of this dog, essentially. So I don't super need those measurements now, but I now know where the end is. So this is the front, happens kind of in the middle of that circle, and then there's the back. So we're going to draw the chest piece of this now, and it kind of looks like a guitar pick almost. Notice how high that goes up. So it happens kind of right under the circle. So make sure that you have the height of this and like the lowest part of this guitar triangle shape, and then you can fill that out. So kind of box it in there. And so that represents like his chest, kind of where his legs are going to connect into. Then we want to do the back represented as this kind of tilted oval because his legs are tilting backwards. So once you have that, you can connect those two pieces together. Again, it's like a cylinder, but notice how high this angles upwards. So start at the lower part of the chest into like the middle of that oval, because the lungs are kind of wide and the back doesn't have as much in there. Speaking of the very back of this, or the top of this dog, there's a slight slope happening, so curve that from the shoulder part into the back with a little bit of a slight dip in there. So next I'm going to do the legs of this, and I always start the legs as just like lines coming out. So notice that they don't come out of the very front of him, but they come out from like the bottom of that triangular shape and kind of towards the middle of it. So I'm just going to indicate that with some lines. Again, you want to figure out how tall to make those. So that's one of the first things that I'll do, is make sure my proportions are right. It's about the same size as the chest, or like 1.5 heads. So I'll draw head 1, head 2, and then a lot of people want to make the legs longer, so they'll make like it'll going 2 heads down. Remember, it's a little bit shorter than that, so I'm going to cut off that leg and put the foot just a tiny bit higher, so about 1.5. Then I'll add in my second leg. They curve slightly, so don't make them go straight down. So notice mine has a slight curve to it. My other leg is also going to have a slight curve coming kind of out of that front part of the guitar pick or triangle shape, kind of slopes down. Again, I'm going to add my foot. Notice that this foot is slightly higher because it's going further away from us. So there are my 2 front legs, my left and my right. Now we're going to do the back legs, which kind of curve backwards. So we don't want it to be too dramatic, but we want to get from about the center of that oval, a slight curve, and then at some point it curves the other way. almost like knees. And then we want to get the back leg as well. So curve back, curve forward, and then that foot. It's going to be a little higher than the first one so that it looks further behind. And at this point, I'm going to turn those lines into cylinders. So I'm going to erase some of those extra details so it's easier to see and switch colors. And I'm going to start with that front leg because it's going to block the other ones. And I'm going to create these kind of tubes. Notice that they taper, they get a little bit skinnier towards the bottom. So they're not full on cylinders, but indicate that the top is wider, the bottom is thinner, and then connect that into this foot that has these three kind of parts. And again, you want the body to kind of connect into the legs, kind of like it has shoulders that go up. So don't just have them sticking out. I'm also going to do the leg that's in front towards the back. So again, I'm going to connect that. Kind of looks like a chicken leg, right? So we get the kind of meaty part, almost like a curved teardrop shape, and then a tube that connects down into the foot. Now I can switch colors and do the back legs. So up at the front towards the head, we have that same tapering. Notice that there's this negative space in between the first two legs, so there's a little triangle in between them. And then you're going to attach your foot to that. In the back, we have that kind of curvature coming out of kind of like the stomach before it connects into the foot. So curve, let it curve the other way and connect that into the foot. Now that both of our legs are done, let's do the tail. Again, I'll switch colors. And the tail is very oval shaped, just sits right at the back there, kind of tilted, and it almost looks like a bagel. There's like a little dip in it, and then it curves up and then goes around like a little spiral. So go up and then turn right back around and like finish that oval off. So this tail kind of curls in on itself. Now let's do the face of this. So let's start by adding the nose, which comes out of the head or out of that circle, not at the way top, but more towards the middle top of it. So just a line to indicate how much it comes out of the face, curves kind of downwards, and then goes in towards the bottom of the circle. And that's its nose or its snout kind of sticking out there. Okay. Now we can finally add in the width of the neck, which is like very rectangular, very big. The collar kind of gets in the way, and there's not an actual lot of meat. It's mostly fluff in there, so everything kind of gets thinner before it connects down into the chest and the body like that. I'm already going to add a little bit of texture there just because I can. And now I can add more details like in the ears and in the face. So let's start by adding in the ears. So we don't want to just add like these two triangles on top, but notice how they're turned. So we're going to, it almost looks like we're adding horns to this, right? So towards kind of the back of the circle, we're going to add these curved triangles that are going forward. The back one is cut off by the head. So we just make a tiny little triangle over there, kind of tilting forward. And then I can finish off with connecting the nose and the head together. Finally, what's left is to do the eye. So the eye, again, we want to add a little bit of shine to it. So if I get really close up there, you can see it's this diamond kind of lined up with the nose of it. And speaking of the nose, it kind of looks like this little big quotation mark, just a little off to the side there. So there's its nose, and then we're going to be adding in its mouth. So eyes, nose, and then the last thing is that we want to add like a line for the mouth. So connect from the nose going down. There's a little like cute upside down V shape that splits it apart, and then this very gentle line that ends kind of thicker in the back. And that's the details for the face. So if you back up, you have a good sketch of a dog. And again, that's all we really need. No real details today.